yet. So, but I'll catch the end of it on the recording.
Okay, great. Thanks for the heads up.
Okay.
Nice and sunny day, which is great.
I know, it's beautiful here.
Yeah, where are you guys at?
I'm in Maple Bay, so on Vancouver Island, so near Duncan.
Okay, I've never been to either of those places, but
Oh,
I've been to the island.
Nanaimo or Victoria?
I've been to Victoria. I might have been to Nanaimo like when I was a kid, maybe.
Yeah, so we're an hour north of Victoria.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
an average.
Have you? I guess you've come over to the Lower Mainland for competitions and such.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll come over for. I usually do the June one. What's the whatever Vancouver Classic or whatever that one's called. And then my husband and I have a boat, and we've boated over several times. And when I'm over there, I'll train at Dynasty, or I've been to competitions, a few of them over there. I think the provincials, but last year I didn't go do the provincials, so I was vacationing.
Yeah, that's a good reason to not do it. And Robin, I believe you're in Kelowna, is it?
I'm not. I'm in Victoria. I was in Kelowna for a while. I trained there for a while.
Oh, yes.
I'm training with Rachel now. Yeah, so it's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's nice here. Yeah.
Yeah, Victoria is nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's 5:34, so I guess we'll get started. Yeah. Anybody have any questions from the last time? But maybe. Well, actually, we might address them today. But yeah. Okay. So I'm going to. Raf, are you able to start the recording?
He's just got his picture there. I don't even know if he's there.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of different
He
names
might be
here.
frozen. Yeah.
I don't know if they are these, like, there's a whole bunch of names. Are they logged in, or are they just?
Yeah, some people don't want to show their video, and that's totally cool too.
Oh, okay. I see.
I'm just gonna wait.
Hi, Sylvia. I am here.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I can't stay for very long, but I just wanted to confirm that I have the meeting running and it is recording for you. So
okay.
I see that there are 11 participants in the meeting right now, and we're about 5 minutes after start time. So take it away. I'll hang around for as long as I can.
Okay, cool. Will it continue to record even when you leave?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, cool. So we're recording. So if you guys are okay with you being on camera, like leave it on. Otherwise, you can feel free to turn it off. And I am going to start my PowerPoint, and I'm going to share my screen. So let me just think about this. Share. And then I just gotta switch. Okay, and let me. All right, you guys you can see my slide hopefully properly. And yeah, okay, great. So that's my reminder. So today we are gonna talk about maybe breaking away from MyFitnessPal or this constant macro tracking. And as weightlifters or other strength athletes, you guys wanna use your nutrition to optimize your training while staying lean, possibly because of the weight class thing, so that you can maximize your competitiveness and counting every gram of your proteins and carbs and fat. It is one way to achieve that, as you guys know from experience, but it is pretty tedious. It can be stressful, and it's not even that accurate in the first place. So some other downsides of counting macros all the time, it doesn't teach you to pay attention to your fullness and hunger, and that the stress from that can contribute to some just anxiety and stuff, but also it can for some people lead to some obsessive compulsive tendencies, which I know I fell into that trap. And last time, if you guys were here, we talked about the concept of something called cognitive dietary restraint, which is basically when you have that intention to you restrict or limit your food. That stress it's a chronic stress that can actually affect things like your blood pressure, inflammation in your body. In women, it can be enough to influence female hormones, and that influence on the female sex hormones is enough to possibly have a negative impact on your bone density. So it is something to consider. And interestingly enough, some research showing that just thinking that you're in a calorie deficit, even if you're not in a calorie deficit, is enough to make you feel hungry, which is, just shows how much psychology is involved in eating. And it's easy to also, if you're like the type A personality, especially, which a lot of athletes are, it's easy to start thinking that the more you cut, better the result is. And that we know, unfortunately, that can be bad as well, cutting too many calories, which is what we talked about last time. And just a reminder, you guys, that for signing up, you guys will get some notes based on what we talk about today, which is gonna, that way you can have something to refer to later on. And in case any of you guys do end up having to leave a little bit early, if you're tired of counting macros and frustrated with hitting a plateau in either your fat loss or your training, book a free session with me. I'd love to go over your specific situation so that we can find a better way to help you get lean while hitting PRs and not having to constantly track every gram of everything. And yes, that's my Instagram handle at @SylviaLiftsWeights. You don't, if we're not friends on there or whatever, add me, send me a DM. You can take out your phone right now and do that. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So in case you guys missed it last time, I am a personal trainer, nutrition coach. I work at a place in Vancouver called Equinox. I also do my independent online personal training and nutrition coaching targeted for time-crunched professionals through my company called Defy Time Fitness. I became really interested in nutrition when I set my goals on becoming a 48-kilogram weightlifting champion. I thought I knew enough to handle my own nutrition because I have that background in kinesiology and in physiology as well. And turns out I was wrong. But I initially, all I had to do to lose fat was just cut out junk food. That was pretty easy. And then later on, that wasn't enough because I gained some muscle. So I lost fat some more by counting calories. And I basically treated calories like a budget, like a reverse budget. So like I thought, just cut calories and I'll be fine. I can save my calories, my calorie budget for another day and like binge on another day. And more recently, I've kind of stopped tracking mostly now, but from like January to March this year, I did actually do an experiment where I signed up for a nutrition coach. And this nutrition coach specialized in bodybuilding prep. He's a bodybuilder himself, and he had me count all my macros, protein, fat, and carbs. And that was the first time that I had done all of that. And my goal with that was to kind of see what it's like. I wanted to try something new because of my health stuff, because of the health stuff I experienced, I wanted to see if being more meticulous would actually help me recover my health. Because if you guys are unfamiliar, any women who do compete in bodybuilding, they will lose their menstrual cycle, and that's actually really bad for health. And so I was hoping maybe this bodybuilding prep coach would maybe help me eat in a way to help me recover my health. So that was an interesting experiment, and I found it super stressful. So I'm kind of glad that I'm not really doing that anymore. And by the way, I am certified in nutrition as well. So I'm certified through a company called Precision Nutrition. I have my level 1 and 2 certification with them. And as a personal trainer, of course, a lot of personal training clients, they do want to lose fat and they do want to gain some muscle oftentimes. So I've had clients lose body fat and I don't get any of them to track calories, not on a regular basis anyway. And today we are going to be talking about 3 main things. We're going to be talking about some of the foundational habits that you guys would want to have, whether you're just trying to be healthy or especially if you're trying to get lean. There are a few foundational habits that are going to help you do that without counting calories and macros. We're going to talk about how to eat, support your training and competition, and we're going to talk about some signs that you're maybe eating too much or eating too little. And so one of the if we're not tracking calories and macros, we still can actually, well, it is still important for us to have some way to gauge if we're eating enough or if we need to eat more or less. And we can actually use our hand for that, the hand portion system, which is a great system that many coaches will use. We have 4 main things that we want to make sure we target in our meals most of the time. So we want to have our protein, we have carbs and fats, which are the macros, which if you're tracking macros, you're very familiar with those. And we also want to make sure we include some vegetables in our meal too. So the 4 things in our meal to look out for, that sort of gives us a pretty good template for how to plan our meal. And if your goal is to stay lean or get lean, prioritizing protein and veggies in particular is going to be super helpful. Lean protein, that is, because those are the things that are going to help you stay full, to give you lots of nutrition without a ton of calories. And if your goal is to get lean and stay lean, you do need to be cautious of how much starch, sugar, and fat you eat. Those are still important, but you need to watch the amounts. And the hand-sized portion, they'll give us a rough idea of the amount of macros in the food. So with protein, we want a palm-sized portion. And a palm-sized portion is going to be roughly 20 to 30 grams of protein most of the time. So like that'll be, you know, your lean meats like chicken or lean beef. Could also equate to about 2 eggs or about a cup of Greek yogurt or cottage cheese. In terms of the carbohydrates amount, 1 portion would be the amount, you use your hand as the way to measure that, a cupped hand. And 1 portion of carbohydrates, it's going to be roughly 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrates. In terms of what that looks like in terms of measurements, so we're thinking roughly half to 2/3 of a cup of cooked grains or legumes, or 1 sort of average sized fruit or tuber like a potato or sweet potato. For fat amounts, 1 portion would be 1 thumb, which is roughly 1 tablespoon. And for veggies, a portion will be about the size of a fist. And if it's a non-starchy veggie, you can, you know, they're very low calories, and that you don't really need to be as precise with the amounts for a lot of the time. And in terms of what that looks like in a day's worth of eating, typically most people will need anywhere from 4 to 8 portions of each of these 4 food groups in a day. And that's of course going to vary depending on, you know, whether you're male or female. Males generally will need more food. It's going to depend on your size. Bigger people are going to need more food. But the great thing about using the hand-sized portion is that bigger people will generally have bigger hands as well. And how active you are, that's going to affect the amount of food you eat. So if you are training like 5 days a week, like a very serious weightlifter, you are going to need more food than somebody who is not as active or who only trains like a couple times a week. And so that goes over sort of like our meal template. We want those 4 main things. In terms of foundational nutrition habits, whether you are trying to just stay healthy or you know, get leaner, it's eating slowly is one of those #1 habits that's going to be good for both those things. So the reason eating slowly is important is because it actually takes about 20 minutes for the brain to sense that you've eaten enough. So by eating slowly, it makes sure that you are going to be less likely to eat beyond that fullness. And it helps you become more satiated or full with smaller portions. Eating slowly also really helps you with digestion because it helps you break down the food mechanically more. It also helps you to release more digestive enzymes, and it gives your digestive system more time to digest as well. And that's actually pretty relevant because if you feel super gassy from not having good digestion, that's going to not feel very good, and it's going to make you, it's going to be tough for you to be doing your heavy training when your belly is distended. And another thing, if you want to take this eating slowly a step further, most people unfortunately don't seem to do this, but if you can eat without distractions, that's going to be like even better. So a lot of times, I'm sure if you look around, you see people eating and they're eating by themselves. They're going to be like either on their phone or on their computer doing something that's, you know, not just focusing on their food. So not only will eating without distractions help you eat slowly and eat less, but you're going to enjoy your food more, which if you are, you know, anybody who's gone through any dieting will know that it's, you know, important when you're dieting. It's really nice. Every bite counts. So you want to enjoy it and make it count. And next thing we want to do is make sure we actually pay attention to our hunger and fullness and eat according to that hunger and your hunger and fullness level. So it might seem like these things may seem obvious, but unfortunately, obvious doesn't mean that people are very good at practicing them. So eating according to hunger means Making sure you are like waiting till you're hungry to eat. Unless, I should caveat this, and when if you're within a couple hours of your planned training session, or you're within a couple hours after your training session, those are, around your training sessions, those are maybe the times when you can eat, eat not just according to your hunger and fullness, but the rest of the time, wait until you're hungry to eat. And a good way to know if you're hungry is actually to allow yourself to experience a little bit of that growling stomach. And it's great because we have to realize that being hungry for a little bit is not an emergency. So if you're hungry all the time and you're under eating all the time, that's going to be bad. But brief periods of hunger is totally okay. And if your goal is to get lean and stay lean, it's actually something you should seek, because that little bit of hunger is a sign that you are eating less food than what your body needs to maintain weight, and that's going to help you with the fat loss as well. And feeling that bit of hunger and waiting for hunger in between meals, that's actually really good for your general health. Metabolically, it's good for your digestive system, good for your metabolic health, and it teaches your body to burn body fat, which is actually really important. If you're eating all around the clock, especially if you're eating carbs or drinking carbohydrates or sugary drinks around the clock, you're only teaching your body that it can only burn carbohydrates for fuel instead of tapping into those fat stores, which is not just a fat loss concern, but very important again for that metabolic health. And of course, eating to hunger and fullness levels means that you are eating to about roughly 80% full instead of eating till you're fully stuffed. And even if you just follow these two things, eating slowly and eating according to your hunger and fullness, doesn't really matter it's very unlikely that you're going to become like overweight or obese. And thirdly, third foundational habit is to eat mostly whole foods and limit processed foods. Again, the exception will be, there are some cases where right before your exercise or right after your exercise or during exercise, that's when some processed foods and some supplements may be really beneficial for those situations. But the rest of the time, focus on those whole foods. And so what does whole foods kind of look like? So if we're looking at protein, we've got our lean proteins, like, just basically things that come from a farm, so or the sea, I guess, in case of seafood. So we got our lean meats like chicken, beef, duck, pork, shellfish, eggs. Those are pretty much whole foods that are minimally processed. And in terms of more processed foods that we want to limit, those would be things like, fried chicken, chicken nuggets, any sort of processed deli meat. Protein bars are actually fairly processed too. And protein powders are processed as well, but they do have their place. So hopefully that makes sense. And in terms of carbohydrates, whole food carbohydrates would include things like whole grains like quinoa, and includes legumes as well. And, whole oats like steel cut oats. We got also tubers like sweet potato and potato, and fruit actually counts as carbohydrates as well. And if we're looking at sort of more processed carbohydrates that we want to avoid, it would include things like cereal, crackers, cookies, a lot of anything that's like got processed sugar in it, canned fruit, juice as well, that would be fairly processed. And here's an example of how carbohydrates aren't just carbohydrates. They are, what we eat is foods, not just carbohydrates. So we can get our carbohydrates from different things, and they'll look very different even if the calories or the amount of carbs are about the same. So here's an example that I have. So this is what roughly 200 calories of different types of foods looks like. So we've got roughly 200 calories worth of carrots, which is actually about half a kilo or a pound of carrots in terms of the raw weight. So that's quite a lot of carrot. Also equals about 2 typical size bananas, or 1 cup of white rice. And I don't know if in my family we eat a lot of white rice. I find that one cup of white rice is not very filling at all. It's almost like it's basically like eating air to me. Whereas eating carrots or bananas, those are very filling because they've got more fruit, sorry, more water and fiber. And that's because they are coming from whole foods, whereas the white rice is a little bit more processed, so not as filling. But also fruits and vegetables are very, very useful things to include in your diet if you are trying to get or stay lean, just because that fiber and water do make them so much more satisfying. And they keep you full longer. They take longer to digest, which is what keeps you from being hungry too quickly. And in terms of fats, whole food fats would include things like nuts, egg yolks, avocados, olives, and more refined fats that we don't want to eat as much of would be any of those conventional, a lot of the conventional cooking oils like canola or soybean oil, or Nutella, or margarine, things that are fairly man-made. So that's kind of the main difference. Is whole foods are they're pretty close to what we find in nature. Processed foods are fairly man-made, and like I said, fruits and veggies, very handy thing to have in your diet. The other thing about the habit of focusing on mostly whole foods is limiting caloric beverages. So these things like pop and juice, you guys probably don't drink too much of that anyway, but alcohol, beer, wine, those things have calories, but they don't really fill us the same way that foods would. So if your goal is to get and stay lean, trying to limit those would be a good idea. And of course, it's not to say that the only way to get lean is to eat healthy foods or cut out junk food. We have to realize that when we have goals, we need to make trade-offs sometimes. So if you're really going to prioritize your performance as an athlete and getting lean, the more you eat things like wine or potato chips and things like those, the harder it is for you to, the slower the progress will be. But for some people that they don't want to give up their wine or whatever it is, and for them it's that worthwhile trade-off because they enjoy wine that much that they doing without the wine is not going to make them happy. But maybe you don't want to give up your wine, but you don't care for like crackers, like Ritz crackers. Those aren't really that great. So that's giving up Ritz crackers, that's a worthwhile trade-off. So for you need to decide for yourself, what are the worthwhile trade-offs you are willing to make, and what are the trade-offs you're not willing to make when it comes to getting to your goals. And that's going to help get you to your goals, but without having you feel super like bad about it at the same time. Are there any questions? Sorry, I can't really see the chat box. Okay, I'm going to keep going unless somebody tells me otherwise. So there's that. So the last thing, it's not really a nutrition thing, but it has a big impact on nutrition, and that is managing our sleep and stress. We talked about that a lot last time. Sleep, when you're sleep deprived, your ability to regulate your hunger is impaired, and you're going to be craving more food, especially starchy and sugary food, when you are sleep deprived. And when you're stressed, typically you will tend to crave those things as well. So get a handle on that. That's going to be very important, not just for your recovery as an athlete, but for managing your appetite and overall health. And so next we're going to talk a little bit about exercise nutrition. So, or actually, let's actually talk about what a normal meal might look like. So if we're going to translate those hand portions to what things will actually look like when we're eating it, here's a couple of examples. So on the left, we have the example of somebody who's having 2 portions of each of those food groups. So we got 2 portions of protein. We got a couple of thumbs of fat. Sorry, yeah, a couple of thumbs of almonds, and we got 2 portions of carbohydrates. We got like fruit on one side, and we got rice on the other side, and we got 2 fists of vegetables. And then on the right, we've got an example of the same foods, but only 1 portion of each. Any questions so far on that? Okay, so why carbs are important? Well, I mentioned before that limiting carbs is a useful way to get and stay lean. But as an athlete, a strength athlete, especially a weightlifting athlete, where we have to create lots of speed on a movement, they are still really important, because when your blood sugar drops really low, it's not going to be really great for your performance, both physically and mentally, and even just how much effort you perceive in your training. It's going to be affected by your blood sugar levels as well. Also, carbs are really important for recovery. And when your body doesn't have enough carbohydrates to use for recovery, it's actually going to take the protein in your body and turn that into sugar. Your body is able to do that. And if you want to preserve your muscle, you don't want to be too low carb. And of course, we talked about how important sleep is. If you don't eat enough carbs, you are going to have a tough time sleeping. I don't know if anybody's experienced that, and I have, and it's not fun. Yeah, so 1 to 3 hours before your exercise, you want to have ideally a normal meal that includes those 4 food groups of the protein, carbs, and you know, those are the most important thing, the protein and carbs, but a little bit of, you know, the other stuff like the vegetables and fat too, just to have a nice whole meal that's nutritious. And if you aren't able to eat within 1 to 3 hours before your exercise, let's say you eat lunch at 12 and then you go into the gym at 5 o'clock or something, and you want to have something right before your training. The other option would be to eat something, you still want to have those carbohydrates and protein, but instead of getting them from whole foods, this is when it would be a good time to have some more easy to digest foods. So in terms of carbohydrates, you want to have something that is going to quickly digest. So something that's, you actually want something that's lower in fiber and possibly lower in fat as well. And some examples of those would be, you know, maybe some like low fiber starches like white rice or some rice cakes. Maple syrup's not a bad option as well. It's a liquid carbohydrate source. And you know, pasta, bread, those crackers, those are some fast digesting carbs that are going to help fuel your workout, because it takes time for your body to digest the food and make that food available to help you with fueling your training and recovering your muscles. So if you eat like you know, sweet potato and broccoli and stuff, while those are carbs, they might not digest quickly enough for you to use during that training session. Protein, of course, is like super important for our goals as strength athletes in terms of keeping our muscle and building muscle so that we can have lots of strength. Any questions so far? Other good options would be like fruit. Fruit is like low fruit that's not super high in fiber. Fruit is actually fairly high sugar, and that's going to be a decent option that you have right before your workout as well. Or dried fruit, or juice, or smoothies. So those are good options as well for foods. And smoothies, protein powder would be a good protein source to have right before your training, because it digests very easily. And then, so that's before exercise. After exercise, and it's going to sort of depend on what's happening the rest of the day. So if you are going to be exercising again the same day, that's when fueling right after workout is going to be super important. So after your workout, if you're going to be training again the same day or within less than 24 hours, you want to again have some protein that's easy to digest. So again, protein powder is a great option. You also want to have carbohydrates that are easy to digest, and you want to minimize fat and minimize fiber. If you are not going to be training again for another 24 hours or so, you can eat anytime within 2 to 3 hours of your training. You do want to make sure that you eat something within about 4 hours of your last meal though. You don't want a big gap between meals. And just a normal meal like we saw before, that's going to be a great option. And I forgot to mention creatine. If you guys want to really have good training, creatine is a really well-researched supplement that's going to help you have more energy during the type of training that we do as strength athletes, particularly if you're in a more bodybuilding phase during the higher rep stuff. That's when creatine is going to be particularly useful. And in terms of the carbohydrates that you have after exercise, something to keep in mind is fruit is not going to be the best option after exercise, simply because we want to prioritize more glucose, and fruit has more fructose typically than some other forms of carbohydrates. And fructose, it's going to be used by the liver, and that's fine, but it's in terms of the carbohydrates that we typically store in our muscles, those require the carbohydrates stored in a muscle. It's called glycogen, and that's actually created from glucose, and we can get glucose either directly from glucose molecules in foods, or we can get that from starch, because when we eat starchy things like white rice or rice cakes, bread, pasta, potatoes and stuff, those are starchy. The starch is actually made up of glucose molecules, and those are the glucose molecules that we can now absorb and put into our muscles to fuel our next workout. And during exercise, well, for most people, water during exercise is going to be a pretty good option, particularly if you're not training particularly hard or long, and particularly if your goal is to lose fat. Water is probably the best option for that. So it's good for sessions that are up to about an hour long, or any sessions that are low intensity or not too much work in total. For newbies, water is definitely more than enough, because we all know it's pretty easy for newbies to make improvements. And option number 2 would be actually having a drink with some protein powder and some carbohydrates like sugar. So this is a good option if you are particularly needing some more recovery, such as when you are having a longer training session, so like 1 to 2 hours. If you're doing a session that requires a lot more energy output, such as weight training with our, not your Olympic lifting typical training, but like more like anything involving sets of 5 or more reps, so like bodybuilding stuff, any metabolic conditioning stuff, any endurance stuff, or field sports. And it's, if you haven't eaten anything within the 2 hours before the training, this is another good time to have it, is during your session. And if you are really prioritizing muscle gain or performance, that's when that carb and protein drink is going to be really, really useful. And the great thing about your typical carb and protein drink is it is actually pretty inexpensive compared to option number 3. So option number 3 is going with essential amino acids, and that's something that you can buy either in a capsule form or in a powder form to dissolve in your drink. And that's going to be a good option if you want more recovery, especially if you haven't had anything during the 2 hours before exercise, which ideally you want to avoid, but sometimes it happens. It's most beneficial for advanced athletes who want to prioritize muscle gain or minimizing weight loss, especially when they are on a very low calorie or a low carb diet. And again, it is a more expensive option. So any questions so far? Because next we are going to talk about fueling for competition. So when it comes to competition fueling, it's really going to depend on what your situation is. So the things we talked about for that in the pre-workout nutrition and the nutrition for during your workout, that's going to apply to fueling for competition too. The difference is if you did any severe water manipulation, you do need to be really careful about sugar intake, because your digestive system can only absorb sugar at a certain rate. So if you eat more sugar than your ability to absorb it, you're going to have a stomach ache or like a lot of bloating. And having a bloated stomach is not something you want when you are weightlifting at a competition. And in terms of the carb intake, you have between that weigh-in and competition and during the competition, it's going to also depend on how depleted you are. So if you went through a really low carb diet to make weight, it's you will need probably to replenish those carbs a little bit more seriously than somebody who didn't go low carb to make weight. And actually, when you're on a competition day, this is not the time to eat for health. It is the time to eat for performance. So don't even worry about eating a ton of fiber and beans and stuff, because eating a ton of fiber is probably not a great idea. But for competition, you can probably eat some, but you don't want to eat anything that's gonna make you super gassy, because again, we don't want that big stomach. It's not comfortable. And fun fact, if you have too much gas in your digestive system, it's going to affect your core function too. So those core muscles aren't going to be working quite as well. I'm going to stop there just in case there are any questions. Okay, if there's none, I'm gonna move on. You guys hopefully everything makes sense. So now we're gonna talk about how to know if you're eating too much or too little. So in order to know, it's very important for you to track. So tracking weight is gonna be a very easy thing to do, but I would recommend that you guys also track some other things like your waist circumference, make it consistent. You want to also track, if your goal is to lean out, you actually want to track that through photos as well. So take a photo front, side, and back. Make sure it's consistent lighting. Make sure it's consistent poses, and you want to be dressed in minimal clothing so that you can really see the changes in muscle definition. Track your performance as well. I'm sure you guys are all, have a training log, so that's probably not too difficult. You can also track your exertion during the training session. So you might, 2 different days, you might be able to do the exact same amount of weight and number of reps for a given exercise, but one day might have a really different effort. And, occasionally tracking your macros and calories is not a bad idea, because it allows you to have an idea of whether you are hitting the amounts that are appropriate for you and your goals. And it's just a way to sort of calibrate the rest of your eating the other times. And by the way, last time I talked about doing a DEXA scan. A DEXA scan is a way for you to actually measure body composition. So you can measure how much fat you have, how much muscle you have. You can measure your bone density as well, which is like pretty important, especially if you are, trying to lose weight, because that can be affected negatively when you're losing weight. So the DEXA scan, you can pay for it privately, or actually Vivian told me that at UBC, if you're a UBC student, you can get a DEXA scan at UBC for discounted rates. So if that is something that applies to you, let me know. I can get you in touch with her. So how do you know if you're eating too little? Well, if your performance sucks, you guys probably already know this, but I'm gonna review it just in case. If you're excessively sore, or you're actually getting injured, whether that's chronic injuries or acute injuries, if your sleep is messed up, like for example, you're not able to sleep, or you wake up excessively early, if you're feeling cold, or you have a low heart rate, or if you have hair loss, those are also signs that maybe you are eating too little. And to some extent, a little of that maybe briefly is okay, but if that's an ongoing thing all the time, it's, you don't want that to be happening too long, because it's not great for health. If you're finding that you're always thinking about food, that could be another sign that you are maybe eating too little. To some extent, again, when you're losing weight, thinking about food more is going to be a pretty natural response, but it depends to how much that's actually disrupting your life. Mood disturbances, that's another thing too that may indicate that you're not quite eating enough. And we talked about last time, if you have any disrupted menstrual cycle, or if you have a loss in libido, that's also a sign. So the things, these things that are listed, a little bit of that might be just part of the process of getting lean, but too much of that, something to watch out for. How do you know if eating too much? Well, the obvious signs would be if you're gaining fat, or if you're not losing fat for the goal that you have. And if you are always full, of course, that's a pretty obvious sign as well. Or if you're never hungry and you're trying to lose weight, because to some extent, having a little bit of hunger as you lose weight is going to be pretty expected. If you're feeling tired all the time and your sleep is disrupted, that can actually also mean you're eating too much as well. So the weird thing that if you eat too much or eat too little, both of those things can disrupt your sleep. So you'll have to sort of take a look at the context that you're in. And if you have any stomach distension or a lot of gas, like farting, that's a sign that maybe you should change something too. So oftentimes as people who eat healthy, we like to eat things like broccoli and onions and Brussels sprouts and sweet potato and beans, and those are nutritious things, but depending on you might not be able to handle too much of that. And it doesn't matter how healthy the food is, if you're feeling gross all the time from farting and having a giant belly, that's a sign that something's not working too well for you. So sometimes just cutting out or reducing those foods can go a long way in helping you to not feel so gassy and bloated. And some other strategies to help you get lean and support performance. I talked about this last time and today, but making sure you support your recovery with sleep is super important. And also helping you, like your mental health is going to be really important to help you get lean too. So making sure that you manage your stress and do things that make you feel fulfilled. So it sounds really like corny, but it's actually important. Another thing is getting plenty of low intensity movement throughout the day. So yes, you can burn calories by doing exercise like running or other forms of cardio, but just if you're spending a lot of your time sitting at a desk, hey, maybe getting some more movement throughout the day is going to be really great for your overall health, and it's going to help you burn more calories in a way that's really not stressful for the body. So that's the really great thing about walking and other low intensity activities is it's not stressful on the body, whereas going for like a 10K run, it can be actually kind of stressful on the body. And if you are losing weight steadily, you might want to consider maybe just losing weight for about 3 months and then trying to hold your weight steady. There's the idea that if you, when you're losing weight, when people lose weight, it's really easy for them to gain weight back. So that's because your body there's a theory that your body likes to hold its weight steady. It's got this set point that it likes to maintain a steady weight at. So when you disrupt that through dieting, your body's to some extent going to try to fight back by making you eat more, by making you move less, by changing your hormones to decrease your metabolism. So if you lose weight and you keep your weight steady for a little while, that's going to be helpful in teaching your body a new set point potentially. And of course, another strategy is if you're finding that like the cutting weight or being in restricted calories it's making life kind of stressful because you're thinking about food all the time or you're super tired, consider taking a break from dieting. So you can do either calorie cycling, where some days you go in your calorie deficit and some days you eat at maintenance or even higher than maintenance. So that's calorie cycling. You can also just take a diet break. So like take 3 days to 3 months where you eat in a way to maintain your weight instead of just losing weight. And that can be really beneficial psychologically and health-wise as well, so that you don't get into all those negative effects of constantly being in a caloric deficit. Yes, and take-home message, foundational habits are really important so that you can get and stay lean without necessarily counting calories all the time. So eat slowly, eat according to your hunger and fullness, eat mostly whole foods, really fill up on veggies and protein. Anybody who's been on super low calories probably is aware that eating protein and veggies is a really good strategy. So that's a really good strategy to keep even when you're not counting calories. Eat carbs and protein before and after your training sessions to help fuel that performance. And think about the trade-offs you're willing and not willing to make. Manage recovery with sleep and stress management. And of course, like I mentioned last time, think like a scientist. So what I've given is some guidelines. It's important for you to gather the data and adjust things accordingly so things work for you. Any questions so far? Okay. Hopefully you guys are all there still. Okay, so I'm gonna go on, and I'm gonna show a couple of case studies. So case study number 1, this is one of my more recent, my current clients. His goal is to get stronger, specifically with some gymnastics stuff, as well as lose some fat around his waist because his clothes weren't fitting quite as good. So what we did was I just gave him a few of these foundational things to implement. So one was eating more vegetables, swapping out some of his starchier foods for more veggies, eating until 80% full, and then portioning food before eating. That was something that he did because I got him to take photos of all his food. And then you can see that in about like 6 weeks time, the left was in April, and then more recently, the photos on the right, you can see that, it's not a dramatic change, but for him, he was happy with his results because he was able to lean out and his waist, his pants didn't fit quite as tightly, and his waist size got shorter or smaller, which you can see in the graph. And there wasn't any like super dramatic change to his nutrition because Here's his photo food log. You can see that he's still eating a good amount of food, and there wasn't anything that was like off limits for him per se. So for him, he doesn't make his own food. His wife does the cooking. He was still able to eat the same things that the rest of his family ate, and he still made progress just from those 3 habits. He got the results, and he was happy with the amount of fat loss that he got. And that just shows that you don't need to do anything crazy to get some results. And the other thing was, in addition to those foundational habits, he got a little bit more personalized exercise programming. Even though he trained on his own, he's an online training client. He did his exercise on his own most of the time, but he gave him just a few recommendations, and that little bit of personalization with his programming is what helped him continue to get stronger and gain more flexibility, which was what he was looking for as well. And so as athletes, it's not just, of course, you guys have coaches you work with, so work with your coach as well to see if you can keep making progress with your performance as well. Case study number 2, this client of mine, this is an in-person training client. She is perimenopausal. She was hitting a fat loss plateau. So these graphs show, body composition changes. So can you guys see my mouse? Okay. So on the left, we show the left shows the changes in body fat. So the blue and green lines show the percentage body fat and the fat mass. So we use a machine called the InBody machine. It gives us an estimate of how much muscle mass and body fat somebody has using bioelectrical impedance or bioimpedance analysis, sorry. And so initially she, wasn't making a ton of progress in her fat loss, but eventually the body fat dropped off, and she was able to basically, her lean mass, which is shown in red on the right, it remained fairly constant even as she lost some body fat. And what we did was, she actually trains in the morning at 6 a.m. like every day, and she would train fasted before. Because she doesn't like the feeling of feeling full when exercising. So she'd wake up, she'd go to the gym and exercise, and then she'd eat breakfast. So what I recommended she do was she take some protein powder with a tiny bit of carbohydrates before her morning workout. So she just made a smoothie with some fruit and like protein powder. So it was just half a scoop of protein powder, not a ton. And then she noticed she wasn't as fatigued during her workouts, which is great. And then later on, we in order to help her lose fat a little bit more, because she had a 50th birthday come up, we had her basically reduce snacking and reduce the number of meals she was eating. So at first it was tough for her to stop snacking because it was partly a habit and partly it was a way to relieve stress from work. She would finish seeing patients and then she would go and have like a protein bar or something. So once she cut out the snacks and actually reduced the number of meals she was eating, she lost fat, and now she goes on vacation and she doesn't gain weight on vacation for the first time. So she's feeling pretty good about her current diet, and she's able to not experience any negative effects as far as we can tell. And that's really important. So if I had somebody reduce the number of meals she was eating and she felt terrible, like I would stop it. But in her case, she felt okay. She was happy with the results. So we continued. That's the importance of actually looking at the data and seeing how people respond. And so the takeaway from this case study is that, pre-exercise nutrition is super important. And then, when you are far away from your training time, you can get away with eating less food. So in Charlene's case, she ate around her workouts, which were in the morning, but she actually, her last meal of the day was like in the late afternoon. So she basically skipped dinner, and that worked for her because she was still getting that food around her training time. And then the last one, this is another personal training client of mine. She is somebody who, those blue and green lines on the left, that's the body fat that went down over a series of several months. And on the right, the red lines are the lean mass and the muscle mass. And she initially, we started with her just following some of those foundational habits, and she made some pretty decent progress in terms of fat loss for the first few months, just by following the, eating to 80% full eating more protein, eating more veggies, made some good progress. And then she wanted to take her fat loss a step further. So we introduced some carb cycling. So basically on her training day, she would eat more carbohydrates, and our non-training days, she would really focus on the lean proteins and veggies. And she had a pretty, significant drop in body fat from that, from like February to like about, I guess, July. From like February to July, she dropped a bunch of body fat. And then later on, she decided that she wanted to eat more carbs, and she kind of craved them. So she went back to more normal eating, but some of those foundations we had established earlier, like eating to 80% full, that stuck around. So even though she did gain some body fat back, she didn't gain it all back, and she was still much leaner than when she had started. So that's, and then if you look at her food, I have her do a photo food log. So when she was carb cycling earlier, her, typical meals would be like protein and veggies, and then she craved more carbs, so she would go back to eating normal food like croissants and lattes, and then like she does to this day, she still eats out a lot. So what this case study shows is that you have to think about the trade-offs and what's worthwhile to you. Is being super lean really worth giving up the foods that you really love? Maybe not in this case, especially if you're not being paid to look a certain way. And of course, you can still get lean without cooking. So this client, she hardly ever cooks, or at least maybe that's changed because of the COVID thing, but she hardly ever cooks, eats out a lot. She still made some progress. So hopefully, any questions, guys, on anything we talked about so far? Because that wraps it up for me. I'm just going to conclude by, again, reminding you guys that if you want to try something new, like you're really tired of using MyFitnessPal or macro tracking, or you're just curious, or you're like hitting a plateau in your fat loss or a plateau with your training, get in touch. I'd love to find out more about you and see what we can do to help you get a little bit further with goals without tracking macros all the time.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah, no problem. I guess there's no questions then that's it from me. But I can stick around for a bit if you guys have any questions that you guys want to ask one-to-one.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Take care, guys.
Bye. Thank you so much.